The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard of the Double Bar Ranch as Martha Hawkins stood at the kitchen window, watching her husband Samuel load supplies into the wagon. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she reached for the tin coffee cup sitting on the rough-hewn table behind her. The bitter aroma that had once been a comfort now filled her with dread. For 3 weeks now, she had noticed the peculiar aftertaste in her morning coffee, metallic, sharp, lingering long after the last sip. At first, she had blamed it on the well water, or perhaps a bad batch of beans from Garner's General Store. But the symptoms had begun shortly after. The nausea, the dizzy spells, the way her vision would blur for minutes at a time. Martha was no fool. She had been married to Samuel Hawkins for 22 years, had borne him 3 children, and had watched him transform from the gentle rancher she had fallen in love with into something harder, colder. The cattle business had been struggling for 2 years running, and she'd overheard him talking in hushed tones with Jake Morrison, the banker from town, about the life insurance policy he'd taken out on her last spring. "Just being practical, Martha," he'd said when she'd asked about it. "Times are uncertain, and a man's got to protect what's his." She lifted the cup to her lips, pretending to drink while letting the liquid barely touch her mouth. The performance had to be convincing. Samuel was watching her from the doorway now, his pale blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Coffee tastes mighty fine this morning, don't it?" he said, stepping into the kitchen. His boots clicked against the wooden floor with each measured step. "Surely does," Martha replied, forcing a smile. "Though I'm feeling a mite poorly again. Maybe I'm coming down with something." Samuel's expression remained unchanged, but she caught the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Well now, that's a shame. Maybe you ought to see Doc Patterson next time we're in town." "Maybe I should." She set the cup down, making sure a good portion of the coffee remained. "I believe I'll rest a spell before starting on the wash." As she moved toward the bedroom, Martha felt Samuel's gaze following her. She made her footsteps heavy, labored, adding a slight stumble for effect. Once inside the bedroom, she closed the door and immediately went to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. Samuel was in the kitchen now, and she watched as he picked up her coffee cup, examined the contents, and then dumped the remainder into the slop bucket. Her worst fears were confirmed. Martha had been born and raised on the frontier. Her father had taught her to read sign, to track game, and to spot danger before it spotted her. She'd married Samuel when she was barely 18, believing in the promise of building something together in this harsh land. Now, at 40, she realized she'd been sleeping next to a man who valued her life less than the struggling cattle ranch. She needed proof. More than that, she needed help. The sound of wagon wheels on gravel told her Samuel was heading to town for supplies, just as he did every Wednesday. This gave her perhaps 4 hours to act. Moving quickly, she retrieved the small glass vial she'd hidden beneath the loose floorboard under their bed. Tomorrow morning, she would collect a sample of her coffee before disposing of it, but first she needed to get to town herself. Martha saddled her mare, Dolly, and took the old mining trail that wound around Devil's Canyon. It would add an hour to her journey, but it would keep her off the main road where Samuel might spot her. The autumn air was crisp, and the cottonwoods along the creek had turned golden. Under different circumstances, she might have enjoyed the ride. Copper Creek was a town of perhaps 300 souls, built where the creek made a sharp bend toward the Rockies. It had grown up around the mines, but when the silver played out, it had survived on cattle ranching and the railroad that carried beef east to Denver and beyond. Martha tied Dolly to the hitching post outside Sheriff Tom Bradley's office. She'd known Tom since they were children. He'd even courted her briefly before she'd chosen Samuel. He was a fair man, honest, but she wondered if he'd believe what she was about to tell him. The sheriff looked up from his paperwork as she entered, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Martha Hawkins, been a dog's age since you've been to town without Samuel. How are things out at the Double Bar?" "Not so good, Tom." She sat in the chair across from his desk, noting how his expression grew serious. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen with an open mind." For the next 20 minutes, Martha laid out her suspicions. She told him about the coffee, the symptoms, the insurance policy, and the way Samuel had been watching her. Tom listened without interruption, his face growing graver with each detail. "These are serious accusations, Martha," he said when she finished. "Samuel Hawkins has always struck me as a decent man, even if he's been struggling with the ranch. I know how it sounds, Tom, but I also know what I've been experiencing. My grandmother used to tell stories about women who died mysterious deaths after their husbands took out policies on their lives. Said it happened more than folks like to admit." Tom leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What is it you want me to do?" Martha reached into her coat pocket and produced the small glass vial. "I want you to test my coffee. Tomorrow morning, I'll collect a sample and bring it to you. Doc Patterson studied back east. He'd know what to look for." "And what if we find something?" "Then we set a trap." Tom was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Martha, but you be careful. If Samuel's really doing what you think he's doing, and he suspects you know, he'll finish the job quick," Martha completed the thought. "That's why we need to move fast." As she prepared to leave, Tom called after her. "Martha, why didn't you just leave, pack up and head back east to your sister's place?" She turned back to face him, her jaw set with determination. "Because this is my home too, Tom. I helped build that ranch with my own 2 hands. I buried 2 babies in the ground out there. I'll be damned if I'm gonna let Samuel Hawkins drive me off what's rightfully mine." The ride back to the ranch seemed longer than usual. Martha's mind raced with plans and possibilities. She would have to be more careful now, more convincing in her performance. Samuel was clever. If he suspected she was onto him, he might change his methods or accelerate his timeline. As she crested the hill that overlooked their property, Martha could see Samuel's wagon already back in the yard. Her heart began to pound. She was supposed to be resting in bed, too sick to venture out. How would she explain being gone? She led Dolly into the barn and quickly unsaddled her, brushing the mare down to remove evidence of the hard ride. As she worked, she formulated her story. She'd felt better and had walked down to the creek to fetch water for washing. It wasn't unusual for her to take Dolly when carrying the heavy buckets. But as she approached the house, Martha realized Samuel was standing on the porch, arms crossed, watching her with those cold blue eyes. "Feeling better, are we?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge she didn't like. "A little," she replied, forcing her voice to sound weak. "The fresh air helped some. I took Dolly down to the creek for wash water." Samuel's gaze moved to her hands, noting the absence of water buckets. "Funny thing, Martha, I rode past the creek on my way back from town. Didn't see hide nor hair of you." Martha's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "Must have been after I came back up. You know how sound carries funny in the canyon." He stepped down from the porch, moving closer to her. "Or maybe you went somewhere else entirely." The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke from a gun barrel. Martha realized that everything had just changed. The careful game she'd been playing was over. Samuel knew that she knew. "I don't know what you're getting at, Samuel," Martha said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'm feeling poorly, and I thought some fresh air might help." Samuel circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You know, Martha, I've been thinking lately about all the changes around here. How you've been acting different, more careful." "Don't know what you mean." "Course you don't." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "It wasn't yet noon. Tell me, darling, how's that coffee been tasting these past few weeks?" The question was a trap, and they both knew it. Martha felt the weight of the glass vial in her coat pocket and prayed he couldn't see the outline of it. "Same as always." "Why?" Samuel's laugh was cold and mirthless. "You always were a poor liar, Martha. Even when we were courting, I could tell when you were stretching the truth." He turned and walked toward the house, then stopped and looked back at her. "I think you're better come inside. We need to have ourselves a real, honest conversation." Martha had no choice but to follow him. As they entered the kitchen, she noticed he'd set out 2 cups and the coffee pot was brewing on the stove. The sight filled her with dread. "Sit," Samuel commanded, gesturing to her usual chair at the table. She remained standing. "I think I'll pass on the coffee just now. My stomach's still unsettled." "I wasn't asking." His hand moved to rest on the grip of his Colt .45. "Sit down, Martha." She sat, her mind racing for options. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, too far to run. Her own rifle was in the bedroom, but Samuel would never let her get that far. She had to buy time, and hope that Tom Bradley would come looking for her if she didn't show up tomorrow with the coffee sample. Samuel poured coffee into both cups, the liquid dark and steaming. He set one in front of her and kept the other for himself. "Now then," he said, settling into his chair across from her, "let's talk about what's really been happening around here." I don't understand." 3 weeks ago, I started putting a little something extra in your morning coffee." Samuel's voice was conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "Nothing dramatic, mind you. Just a touch of rat poison mixed in with the grounds. Enough to make you sick, maybe kill you slow-like, make it look natural." Martha's hands clenched in her lap. "Why, Samuel? 22 years of marriage, 3 children." "Money, darling, pure and simple." He took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim. "Ranch is failing, and that insurance policy I took out on you, $5,000. Enough to pay off the bank and maybe start fresh somewhere else." "And our children?" Samuel shrugged. "They're grown and gone, got their own lives now. Besides, they always liked you better anyway." The casual cruelty of it took Martha's breath away. She'd known Samuel had grown harder over the years, but she'd never imagined this depth of callousness. "But you got suspicious, didn't you?" Samuel continued. "Started pretending to drink your coffee while dumping most of it out when you thought I wasn't looking. I don't know what—" "And then today, you rode to town. Probably went to see Tom Bradley, knowing you two have history." Samuel leaned forward, his eyes glittering with a dangerous light. "What did you tell him, Martha?" She remained silent, and Samuel's expression darkened. "Doesn't matter much, I suppose. See, I've decided to change my approach. Can't have you running around town spreading stories about me. Bad for a man's reputation." He pushed her coffee cup closer to her. "This cup here's got enough strychnine in it to kill a horse. You're gonna drink it, and in about 10 minutes, you're gonna have yourself a real painful death. I'll tell folks in town you'd been ailing for weeks, and Doc Patterson will confirm it since you've been showing all the symptoms." Martha looked at the cup, then back at her husband. "And if I refuse?" Samuel drew his pistol and laid it on the table between them. "Then I'll shoot you and tell Tom Bradley I caught you stealing from the strong box." Say you'd been taking money for weeks to fund your plan to run off with some drifter. Either way, you're dead, but one way's a lot more painful than the other. The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Martha stared at the coffee cup, her mind working furiously. Samuel had made one crucial mistake. He told her exactly what was in the cup and how much time she had. Strychnine was a violent poison that caused convulsions and muscle spasms. But Martha remembered something her father had taught her about certain plants that grew wild in the canyon. Jimsonweed, when chewed, could cause symptoms that might be mistaken for strychnine poisoning, hallucinations, difficulty speaking, erratic behavior, but it wasn't necessarily fatal in small doses. More importantly, she remembered where Samuel kept his emergency supply of laudanum in the barn, left over from when their prize stallion had been injured last spring. "You win, Samuel," she said quietly, reaching for the cup. "But I want you to know something first." "What's that?" "I've been keeping a journal. Every day for the past 3 weeks, writing down how I've been feeling, what I've been thinking. It's hidden where you'll never find it, and I've arranged for it to be delivered to Sheriff Bradley if something happens to me." It was a lie, but she saw doubt flicker in Samuel's eyes. "You're bluffing." "Maybe, but are you willing to bet your neck on it?" She lifted the cup to her lips. "Because murder's a hanging offense in Colorado territory, and Tom Bradley's no fool." Samuel's hand tightened on his pistol. "Drink it, Martha." She tilted the cup and let a small amount of the coffee touch her lips, then set it back down with a sharp bang. "There. Satisfied? All of it. Give me a minute to make peace with my maker." She bowed her head as if in prayer, but her eyes were scanning the kitchen for anything she could use as a weapon. The cast-iron skillet hanging by the stove was too far away. The carving knife was in the drawer behind Samuel. But there, next to the sugar bowl, was the heavy glass oil lamp they used for reading in the evenings. "Time's up," Samuel said. Martha grabbed the oil lamp and hurled it at Samuel's head in one fluid motion. He ducked, but the lamp caught him on the shoulder, shattering against the wall behind him and sending kerosene splashing across the kitchen. In the confusion, Martha lunged across the table, knocking over chairs and sending the coffee cups flying. Samuel fired his pistol, but the shot went wide, punching a hole in the kitchen window. Martha made it to the door and burst out onto the porch, running toward the barn. Behind her, she could hear Samuel cursing and struggling to his feet. She had perhaps 30 seconds before he recovered enough to pursue her. The barn was dim and musty, filled with the scent of hay and horse sweat. Martha climbed quickly to the loft where Samuel kept his supplies, searching frantically through boxes and barrels. There, the brown bottle of laudanum, still half full. She could hear Samuel's boots on the porch now, then on the ground outside. He was calling her name, his voice tight with rage. "Martha, you can't run forever. This ranch is miles from anywhere, and I know every hiding spot better than you do." She had to get to her horse, but Dolly was in the corral behind the barn, and Samuel would see her if she tried to reach the mare. Instead, Martha climbed down from the loft and positioned herself behind the barn door, the laudanum bottle in her hand. Samuel's footsteps grew closer. She could see his shadow moving past the windows. "I know you're in there, Martha. Come out now and I'll make it quick. Keep running and I'll make sure you suffer before you die." The barn door creaked open and Samuel stepped inside, his pistol drawn. Martha waited until he was fully committed to entering, then stepped out from behind the door and brought the heavy laudanum bottle down on the back of his skull. Samuel's dropped like a felled tree, his pistol skittering across the barn floor. Martha quickly retrieved the weapon, then knelt beside her unconscious husband. He was breathing, but would likely be out for several minutes. She had to get to town and bring back help, but first she needed evidence. Racing back to the house, Martha collected the shattered remains of her coffee cup and carefully scraped the residue into a clean jar. The kitchen still reeked of kerosene, and broken glass covered the floor. As she saddled Dolly with shaking hands, Martha could hear Samuel groaning in the barn. He would be awake soon, and angry beyond reason. She had to reach Copper Creek before he recovered enough to pursue her. The ride to town was a blur of pounding hooves and racing thoughts. Martha pushed Dolly harder than she ever had before, taking risks on the narrow canyon trail that could have sent them both tumbling to their deaths. But fear drove her forward, and the faithful mare responded to her urgency. She reached Sheriff Bradley's office just as the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood. Tom emerged from the building as she dismounted, taking one look at her disheveled appearance and immediately reaching for his rifle. "Martha, what in tarnation?" "He tried to poison me, Tom," she gasped, still catching her breath from the hard ride. "Samuel, just like I suspected, only worse. He's got strychnine, and he tried to make me drink it." Tom helped her into his office and poured her a glass of water from the pitcher on his desk. "Slow down and tell me what happened." Martha related the entire confrontation, from Samuel's confession to her escape from the barn. She showed Tom the jar containing the coffee residue and Samuel's pistol, which she'd brought as evidence. "He'll be waking up soon," she concluded, "and when he does, he'll come looking for me. Probably figure to finish what he started." Tom stood and reached for his gun belt. "Then I reckon we better get back out there before he has the chance." "Tom, there's something else." Martha's voice was quiet but determined. "I want to face him. I want him to know that I'm not the helpless victim he thought I was." The sheriff studied her face in the lamplight. "Martha, that's not... It's the only way, Tom. If you just arrest him, he'll claim I'm crazy, that I made it all up. But if we catch him in the act, force him to confess." Tom was quiet for a long moment. "What are you proposing?" Martha's eyes were hard as flint. "We're going to set a trap of our own." The plan was dangerous, but it was the only way to ensure Samuel faced justice for his crimes. Tom Bradley had initially resisted the idea, but Martha's arguments were sound. Without a confession or catching Samuel in the act, the case would come down to her word against his, and frontier juries were notoriously reluctant to convict a man based solely on his wife's testimony. They rode back toward the Double Bar Ranch under cover of darkness, taking the long way around to avoid being spotted. Tom had deputized 2 men from town, Frank Morrison, Jake's older brother, and Bill Garrett, a former cavalry soldier who'd settled in Copper Creek after his discharge. Both men were reliable and knew how to handle themselves in a fight. The ranch house was dark when they arrived, but smoke was rising from the chimney. Samuel was awake and waiting. "I want you boys positioned where you can see the kitchen window," Tom instructed the 2 deputies. "Soon as you hear my signal, 3 quick whistles, you come running, and if shooting starts before then, don't hesitate to join in." Martha checked the small derringer Tom had given her, tucking it into her coat pocket. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it might buy her crucial seconds if things went wrong. "You sure about this, Martha?" Tom asked one final time. "I'm sure." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her hat. "Samuel Hawkins chose his path when he decided my life was worth less than $5,000. Now he's going to face the consequences." They approached the house from different directions. Tom would come through the front door once Martha had engaged Samuel in conversation, while the deputies would maintain their positions outside unless needed. Martha knocked on the kitchen door, then stepped back and waited. After a moment, she heard footsteps approaching, then Samuel's voice, muffled by the wood. "That you, Martha?" "It's me, Samuel. I want to talk." The door opened, revealing her husband's face in the lamplight. A large bruise covered the left side of his forehead where she'd struck him with the laudanum bottle, and his eyes were cold with fury. Well, well, the little mouse comes crawling back to her hole. "May I come in?" Samuel stepped aside, keeping his right hand near his gun. "By all means, we got ourselves some unfinished business to attend to." The kitchen had been cleaned up since Martha's escape. The broken glass was gone, and the smell of kerosene had been replaced by the aroma of burning pine logs. On the table sat a single coffee cup, steaming in the lamplight. "I figured you'd be back," Samuel said, closing the door behind her. "Where else you gonna go? This is your home, ain't it?" It was. Martha moved carefully to the center of the room, positioning herself where Tom would be able to see her through the window. "Before I learned what kind of man I married." "What kind of man?" Samuel's laugh was bitter. "I'm the kind of man who does what needs doing to survive. This ranch is everything I got, Martha. Everything I built. Everything I worked for. I ain't gonna lose it because you can't appreciate the sacrifices a man's gotta make." "Sacrifices?" Martha's voice rose with indignation. "You call murdering your wife a sacrifice?" "I call it practical." Samuel moved toward the table, his hand hovering over his pistol. "You were gonna die anyway, Martha. We all are, sooner or later. I just decided to make your death count for something." "For $5,000. $5,000 that'll keep this ranch running and put food on the table for years to come." Samuel picked up the coffee cup from the table. "Speaking of which, you never did finish your morning coffee. I took the liberty of brewing you a fresh cup." Martha could see the dark liquid sloshing in the cup and knew it contained enough poison to kill her within minutes. But she also knew that Tom Bradley was somewhere nearby. "What if I refuse?" "Then I'll hold you down and pour it down your throat myself." Samuel set the cup on the table between them. "Either way, you're gonna drink it, and then I'm gonna bury you out back next to the babies. Tell folks you died of the sickness you've been fighting." "And Sheriff Bradley, what about when he comes around asking questions?" Samuel's expression darkened. "What about him? Far as Tom knows, you've been ailing for weeks. Hell, half the town's seen you looking poorly when you come to church. He might want to examine the body. Won't be much left to examine by the time I send word to town. Sometimes it takes a day or two to get the message through, what with the distance and all." Samuel's smile was cruel. Shame how fast things spoil in this heat. Martha felt sick to her stomach, not from any poison, but from the realization of how thoroughly her husband had planned her murder. Every detail had been considered, every possible complication addressed. "You really think you've thought of everything?" she said. "I know I have." Samuel gestured toward the coffee cup. "Now drink." "And if I told you I'd already been to see Tom Bradley? That I've given him evidence of what you've been doing?" Samuel's confidence faltered for just a moment, then returned full force. "You're bluffing. You didn't have time to collect any evidence before you ran off." Martha reached into her coat pocket, not for the derringer, but for a folded piece of paper she'd prepared before leaving town. "This here's a sworn statement I gave to Sheriff Bradley this afternoon. Details everything you told me in this very kitchen." She tossed the paper onto the table, and Samuel snatched it up, his eyes scanning the contents. As he read, his face grew pale. How did you—" "Remember every word, Samuel. Every cruel, heartless word." Martha took a step closer to the table. "And so does Sheriff Bradley." "You're lying. Even if you did go to Tom, it's just your word against mine." "Not anymore." Martha smiled grimly. "See, you just confessed to everything all over again. And this time, you had witnesses. Samuel spun toward the window just as Tom Bradley burst through the front door, his rifle trained on the rancher. At the same moment, Frank Morrison and Bill Garrett appeared at the kitchen window, their weapons drawn. "Samuel Hawkins," Tom announced in his official voice, "you're under arrest for the attempted murder of your wife." Samuel's hand dropped to his pistol, but he froze as he realized he was outnumbered and outgunned. His shoulders sagged in defeat. "How long were you listening?" he asked. "Long enough," Tom replied. "Put your hands where I can see them." Samuel complied, and Tom quickly moved forward to disarm him. As the sheriff fastened the handcuffs around Samuel's wrists, the rancher looked at Martha with something that might have been respect. "You always were smarter than I gave you credit for," he said. "And you were always meaner than I wanted to believe." Tom checked the coffee cup on the table, noting its contents. "Well, have Doc Patterson test this along with the sample Martha brought to town. Should be more than enough evidence to convict you." As they prepared to transport Samuel to jail, Martha walked through the house one final time. 22 years of marriage, 3 children raised, countless memories, both good and bad. But it wasn't home anymore. It couldn't be after what had happened here. "What'll you do now?" Tom asked as they stood on the porch. Martha looked out over the ranch, the barn where she'd fought for her life, the corral where her horses grazed, the small cemetery where her 2 infant children rested beneath simple wooden crosses. It was beautiful land, rich and fertile, with water rights and good grazing. "I reckon I'll sell the cattle and lease the grazing rights," she said after a moment. "Keep the house and maybe take in boarders from town, women who need a place to stay while they figure out their next step." "Sounds like a fine idea. And Tom, I want you to know how grateful I am. You could have dismissed my suspicions, told me I was just a hysterical woman imagining things." Tom tipped his hat to her. "Martha, I've known you since we were children. You're many things, but hysterical ain't one of them." The trial took place 6 weeks later in the Territorial Courthouse in Denver. Samuel Hawkins was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 20 years in the Territorial Prison. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The poisoned coffee, his detailed confession overheard by multiple witnesses, and the testimony of Dr. Patterson, who confirmed that Martha had indeed been slowly poisoned over several weeks. On the day the verdict was announced, Martha sat in the front row of the courtroom, wearing her best black dress and the pearl earrings her mother had given her on her wedding day. As Samuel was led away in chains, he turned to look at her one final time. "I'm sorry, Martha," he said, and for just a moment she glimpsed the man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "I know you are, Samuel, but sorry doesn't change what you did." 6 months later, Martha Hawkins was indeed taking in boarders at the Double Bar Ranch. Her first guest was a young widow named Sarah Chen, whose husband had been killed in a mining accident. Sarah had nowhere to go and no money to speak of, but Martha remembered what it felt like to be trapped and desperate. "How much for room and board?" Sarah had asked when she arrived at the ranch with nothing but a carpet bag and her infant son. "How much can you afford?" Martha had replied. "Nothing right now, but I'm willing to work and I learn fast." "Then I reckon we can figure something out." As autumn settled over the Colorado Territory, Martha found herself busier and more content than she'd been in years. The ranch was thriving under her sole management, and she had discovered she had a talent for helping women who'd found themselves in difficult circumstances. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Sheriff Tom Bradley rode up the drive. He'd taken to stopping by periodically, ostensibly to check on her safety, but Martha suspected his visits had more to do with the apple pie she was known for baking. "Evening, Martha," he said, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. "How are you settling in?" "Just fine, Tom. Sarah's turned out to be a godsend. She's got a way with horses I've never seen, and little David's growing like a weed." Tom settled into the chair beside her, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Any regrets about keeping the ranch?" Martha considered the question as she watched the last light fade from the sky. "No regrets," she said finally. "This land has seen joy and sorrow, birth and death, love and betrayal. But it's still good land, and it deserves to be part of something better than what Samuel had planned for it." "And what about you? Any plans for the future?" Martha smiled, feeling more at peace than she had in years. "I'm thinking about maybe expanding the operation. There's a lot of women out there who need a safe place to land when life deals them a bad hand, and this ranch has plenty of room." Tom nodded approvingly. "Sounds like a worthy cause." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Martha reflected on the bitter truth she discovered about her marriage and her husband. It had nearly cost her life, but it had also revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed. She'd faced down a killer, outwitted a man who'd underestimated her, and emerged not as a victim, but as a survivor. The Double Bar Ranch would continue, but it would be something different now. Not just a cattle operation, but a sanctuary for women who needed to discover their own strength. And Martha Hawkins, who'd once been marked for death by the man who'd promised to love and protect her, would be there to help them find it. The bitter truth had nearly destroyed her, but in the end, it had set her free.